Hello, fellow scientists. The purpose of this video is to work through your muscles and energy packet, specifically your input-output muscle cell model. And this is going to be pages 19 through 23. So let's go ahead down to page 19, starting right here. Okay, so input-output model. So now that we've talked about the lab and our exercise lab, we're going to create a model that shows everything that goes into muscles, everything that goes out of the muscles, as well as talk about some of the structures that exist within. So if we go to the next page, now we're going to see a muscle at rest and then a muscle during exercise. First of all, we're going to do essentially the same thing here that we ended up doing here. So just keep that in mind, that everything I talk about for the top also applies for the bottom with one difference. And we'll get to that difference at the end. Additionally, everything that I'm saying is coming from this text here. So you will want to read through this paragraph. It talks about the mitochondria and the glucose and cell respiration and carbon dioxide and ATP and all of the language that I'm going to use as I describe this model. So this is a nice thing to read just to summarize why we get tired. All right, let's go back to our models. So once again, I'm going to describe muscles at rest, inputs, structures, processes, and outputs. It's going to be the same thing, top and bottom, with one difference, and I'll describe the difference at the end. So let's start with the inputs. So the easy thing about muscle cells when it comes to exercise is that the same things that are going into our body and out of our body are the same things going in and out of each individual cell. In fact, the reason that we bring these things in and out of our body is because our cells need them to go in and out of each cell. So the inputs, and you'll have to pause it once I talk about these and fill in your model. The inputs are, number one, oxygen, right? We breathe in oxygen, muscle cells then take in the oxygen. And they getting this out of the blood, right? So we breathe it in, it goes to our lungs, from our lungs into our blood to our muscles. Like that's a very common pathway for things in our body. So oxygen is going into the muscle. Sugar, food, is also going into the muscle. It has a similar pathway. We eat food into our stomach. From our digestive system, it goes into blood. From blood, it goes to the muscle cell. Easy. So glucose sugar is another one. It is then going to go into the muscle, so the structures. The name of the structure is the mitochondria. You can find the spelling of that in the reading if you need it. And the mitochondria, mitochondria, that's the site of this cell respiration ATP production. Okay, so the mitochondria is the structure. You probably want to write cellular respiration in there as well. You'll see that in the reading. That's the name of the process that's occurring. And so then we have our output. So what gets created in the muscle? So we create ATP energy, which it can use to power itself. And then we also create carbon dioxide, which, reversing the process, goes into the blood, which goes into the lungs, which we breathe out. And then it also creates water. Water is going into the blood, which is going to be either excreted in urine or it might be sweated out. Also, it's breathed out partially through the lungs. So once again, your inputs are oxygen and glucose. Your structures inside the muscle are mitochondria and the process cell respiration. And then our outputs are carbon dioxide, water, ATP energy, and I would even add heat, right? Because we know that's something that happens during exercise. Now down here, same thing, same inputs, same structures, same outputs. So what's the difference? Well, the difference actually comes from this graph, right? So if we look at this graph, we can see that when you're at rest, you have a small amount. When you're exercising, you have a large amount. So that's what we want to put here. And we can just over here write the word less, and over here, less, right? So it's like less oxygen and less carbon dioxide. And then during exercise, it's more oxygen and more carbon dioxide. And that's going to be the basis of our model. I think your reading does bring up, yeah, it does bring up lactic acid, and that would be an output as well. That's what made our muscles hurt. That's especially during exercise, but it actually exists sometimes even at rest. But you can go ahead and add that as muscle cell during exercise, lactic acid. Okay, so we're going to scroll through. So we have a question here. It says, how do muscle cells access what they need to keep producing energy? Well, for that, we're essentially just taking this model and we're turning it into a sentence. To produce energy, muscle cells take in these things to these structures and then produce these outputs. So make sure that you look at your model and then take your inputs first in your sentence to your structures to your outputs. For this one, I'm going to change the directions, and what I'd like you to do is rank them. Which of these 5 words have we talked about the most in class? That's number 1. What's the second most common word? That's number 2. Number 3, number 4, and then number 5 is the one that we talk about the least. And then you can skip this section if you're doing this as a revision. So that brings us to the summary. Now this is a reflection summary, so I always tell students, don't worry about doing it for this lab, but you need to do it for, you need to write something in here, let me be clear. But just do it for the last activity you did in class. So when you were talking with your neighbors or you were engaged in an activity or a lab, what was something that went well? Just think about the discussion you had. What's something that you are still working on improving? Who is a person who often helps you? What is something that you have learned from another student? And what's an idea that you've contributed? And once again, you can just pick that from a recent lesson. It doesn't have to go back to this specific lesson. And that's going to bring us to our blood glucose graph investigation, which will be our next video.